Welcome to the new era of remote work, strategies for the distributed enterprise. I'm Gary Bowles. I'm the chair for the future of work with Singularity University, which is a Silicon Valley-based think tank, though right now I'm in Washington, D.C., where some of you may have heard we have an election going on. We're going to be focusing on the various ways in which remote and distributed work, and we're going to be explaining what those things are transforming our work, our teams, the way we lead our organizations, the organizations themselves, our industries, and even our economies. I've got an amazing group of guests with me that I can't wait for you to meet. I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves, tell their role, their organization, and where they're connecting from. And Amanda, I'd love it if you'd start us off.
Hello, I'm Amanda Stenaway. I'm in Sydney, Australia. My role, I'm the global head of workplace for a large architectural firm called Woods Bagot. My role is actually working with large organizations from Google, Amazon, and a whole heap of techs to financial institutions all around the world. I guess my absolute expertise today is really around helping businesses enable a new way of work and help them navigate strategically how this time is actually shifting the way we work.
Christian, where are you coming from?
Yeah, Gary, I'm coming from Germany. Yeah, I am the founder of HoloLux. That's one of Germany's first mixed reality agencies. Yeah, I help also larger customers in Germany to achieve more with the latest technology. So I really love technology. That's absolutely my thing. I work closely with Microsoft and be proud to be honored this year the 11th time in a row with the Microsoft MVP Award. Yeah, that's something like the Oscar for Microsoft. You have to do a lot of community work and public speaking to earn this award. And I'm really glad to join the session.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. And John, you couldn't, you're so excited, you just couldn't wait to get closer to Korea. So tell us where you are.
Yeah, 24 hours ago, I was in Silicon Valley, California, but I flew into Korea. So I'm John, founder, CEO of Sendbird. Basically, what we do is we are a chat API. We're the world's #1 chat API. We power user-to-user communication in other applications. So today we power about 100 million users that chat through our platform. Apps like Reddit, Yahoo Fantasy Sports, Rakuten, Paytm, a lot of food delivery apps and online community apps use us within their applications to power their communication. We have 230 employees across 7 different cities around the world, and then we have raised $120 million to date, led by Tiger Global and Iconic Capital in our previous Series B. So that's a little bit about who I am.
Wonderful. Well, I think together we can knit together a range of different perspectives to talk about the impact on remote and distributed work in what I call the era of the Great Reset. I wrote a piece back in March that was published in Techonomy.com where I said basically this isn't just a pause, but it's sort of a reset, and especially as what we've seen is impacting the way we work, where we work, when, and to some extent even why we work. All of those different characteristics changed overnight. So we've definitely seen a big shift towards more distributed work, more work that's done remotely by people, and in some cases in a breathtaking period of time. What's the single greatest problem that each of you have seen organizations dealing with? And what's the most effective strategy you've seen organizations have adopted to increase their ability to make this more distributed world of work more effective? So Amanda, why don't you start us off, since so much you focus on is on different kinds of enterprises.
Absolutely. I think most of our clients would say out loud there are no problems, but openly and honestly, the way that we have watched people work and how they've evolved, particularly over the last 6 months, is really the challenge around collaboration. And I talk about collaboration because most people know how to meet. They actually they only know how to meet on video. They don't actually genuinely collaborate. And for me, in businesses that are driving innovation and problem solving, the ability to collaborate is fundamental to solving problems. And I think we've seen that as a challenge across no matter what platform a lot of our clients are using. They know how to share information, and we know how to do that didactically. So I'm showing you something, but our ability to come together and collaborate and solve problems has been hampered for most of our clients. And they don't really like to talk about that, but they have had to add different programs on like Miro or Mural and Whiteboard to try and get places where people can actually actively mark up and exchange information and problem solve. And so I think really a lot of the work that we're doing, and we're very lucky in Australia, we are back to work. And so the things that most organizations are doing is talking about how we actually get collaboration happening rather than meet face-to-face meeting or even just video meeting. And I think it's really important for every single person that we work with about getting back to innovating and problem solving. And I think if you look at any great time in history, we've always said we made great innovations. And I think one of the key questions I ask every client I work with is, how much innovation did you do over the last 7 months? Because most people's benchmark was really, hey, survival. You know, most people said we did better than I thought. And actually that was just really survival rather than thriving. So that's probably the biggest problem I've seen.
Innovation, clearly, this is one of the things, one of our biggest challenges. We've all gone through in this great reset. We went through this sort of just plain survival period. And hopefully now we're seeing more of that kind of innovation. Now for you, John, I mean, you're so much of your focus is on virtual reality, augmented reality, what we would often call XR, or the various different flavors of reality. Are you seeing more innovation in the technology arena? How is you've seen the impact of the Great Reset?
So one of the things we kind of noticed a lot on was from the external, the customer side of things, and then two is the internal, the collaboration side of pieces, right? I think the customer side is really, instead of thinking the analog, offline first customer experience, really shifting that mindset to the digital first, virtual first kind of customer experience has been a critical strategy for customers to adapt to this new world. We've seen this in even some of the like sports industries where some companies were still kind of wishing the sports league will come back. They've been losing out a lot of the opportunities versus some of the customers who quickly adapted to bringing the fan base online, making them, bringing them the community through whether it be chat, voice, or video, have really been able to almost take advantage of this situation and actually drive up their business. And I think the internal side of things too, I think like the collaboration is really important, but one thing about collaboration we noticed was to really make it work in this distributed and remote first work, you have to kind of shift from the synchronous first, like in-person meetings and phone calls, to a asynchronous mode of collaboration through documentation, being able to collaborate across different time zones and different geos. To really do that, there has to be a fundamental shift in how we kind of collaborate through asynchronous kind of mode of operation. And that has certainly been one of the most toughest challenges that we've seen across different startups, including our own.
So Christian, I am going to give you that setup though. So tell us about innovation, especially when it comes to virtual and other kinds of reality.
Yeah, in general, let's say the whole remote work thing is in Germany, I would say rather something new. We see, we don't have a strong remote work culture in Germany, and and the first thing that IT was challenged now when we suddenly go to a lockdown was they are even not well prepared from the basic IT. So in the first step, they had to learn to adapt this new situation. And now we see, because there's some terms like Zoom fatigue, that people get tired for only online meetings. We see now increasing demand and more experience with virtual reality, where people try to find new ways, to close that gap from remote work. But it's currently a complicated situation because we weren't prepared like everybody, and the people were rather overwhelmed to now be all in home office like I'm now. We are in Germany, just entered the second lockdown, and it's really a booster for virtual reality, this pandemic.
So you just brought up a point I think that's very important for people to understand too. Again, one of the reasons I talk so much about the Great Reset is one of the things I talked about is in what we're in right now, which is phase 2, is we're going to see this constantly shifting landscape of whether or not we have to have shut down for the virus, what is happening in a particular geography, what's happening in a particular industry, in your particular company, and it's going to be a constantly shifting landscape. So here we have a perfect example of the juxtaposition between what Amanda's experience is and what your experience is, Christian, and I think this is what we're going to be seeing on an ongoing basis. Now, one of the things, John, you mentioned was that really, because this whole thing about synchronous and asynchronous communications is really affecting the way that teams are communicating with each other. how are you seeing management and leading changing as you're trying to manage across different geographies, time zones, languages, constantly shifting landscape of what you can and can't do? Are there any insights that you've gotten as to how that's being done effectively?
Yeah, one thing that we learned over the years, and especially the pandemic has accelerated, was if you think about the language, the time zone, all these things, how that impacts overall collaboration. We were actually quite surprised to find that language usually actually is one of the biggest challenges that people have to face, especially now that all of these collaboration happens over Zoom. We're losing so much on this nonverbal cues. It's actually, you have to really focus on the linguistic part to get most of the content. So language barrier has been, I think, has been exacerbated. And also time zone, it's manageable. I mean, there was time zone even before pandemic. Still, there was global organization that were, I guess, resolving that. But the linguistic barrier, and I think what's even more impactful is the cultural kind of differences. It's really kind of start to show, because before you could actually meet people in the real life, and again, capture a lot of the nonverbal cues and kind of the spontaneous community that builds around having bringing people together. Now, since all of that is gone, you have to really focus on very intentional calls, and really that deprives you of a lot of these nonverbal cues that really helps you build a relationship. Because people actually if you think about the currency of collaboration, trust is probably one of the most important currency in any kind of collaboration. And these kind of in-person meetings, spontaneous kind of water cooler conversations are kind of what kind of helps you build that trust. But now it's really, really hard to build those. So that is something that we found to be really, really hard. So one way, I guess, a couple of strategies that companies like us have been adopting is, one, shifting from these very relying on analog mode of communication, shifting that to a more of a asynchronous mode of collaboration. And what I mean by that is particularly on documentation side of things. So instead of getting people to wait until the other side of the world wakes up or setting up Zoom calls, you try to document as much as possible around your beliefs, the guidelines, and principles, so that when other people are working on similar issues, they don't have to wait until to get on a Zoom call with someone else. They can simply follow through the guidelines and then make their own decisions based on those principles and guidelines. And that kind of is kind of probably an important factor in shifting to a asynchronous collaboration. And a couple of companies that have done this really well are companies like GitLab. A really, really successful company. They have this extreme transparency and open culture where they document everything, and it's publicly available on their handbook, which everyone on the internet pretty much can learn about how they collaborate. So things like that, like how do you shift from that synchronous mindset to asynchronous, has been a very important pillar for us to adapt to this new pandemic world.
No, I think that's a great insight. Another poster child I think of is Asana, which is all about organizational alignment. And that's exactly the same sort of processes. Is they're continually having people keep information about what's going on with different projects, continually pushing that so that it's available to anybody, no matter where they are in the world. And as you say, synchronous is harder because you've all got to get on the Zoom call at the same time. But if you can keep more and more information on these platforms to be able to ensure that everybody's got access to the same information, you can stay much more in sync. Now, Amanda, one of the things that we're talking about, this constantly shifting landscape for different organizations, is a huge amount of curiosity and worry about place-based work. What's happening to the office? How are we thinking about the ways we can design to be able to continue to have as inclusive and as adapted an office space? And in addition, we've got to think about health and safety. So how do you think about all of those different elements that now have to go into different work environments? And even in a place like Sydney, where the lights are on and people are able to get together, how do you help people to understand that that can change? And what's the design of the workplace? What are some of the heuristics that you think about?
Absolutely. I think really importantly on the comment that John made, high performance teams require trust, and culture is king in almost every organization. And I talk a lot with the companies I work with around, we're trading on cultural capital that was created in 2019, not in 2020. We're kind of been running on this kind of fear. And I think really importantly, as you start to recreate the idea of the office, you have to work through what it is fundamental for. And I think in all the businesses we're working with, it comes down to community, culture, the creation of trust, but also the creation of information share and learning. And I think really importantly, the things that people have missed is actually the social part and the human part of work. And that doesn't mean that all the other parts aren't important, but certainly they are the drivers as we start to create a back to work strategy. That's really about creating the physical place as a cultural anchor. And that's not saying that culture cannot be cultivated remotely. It's saying that our way of exchange has been and probably always will be in some way harnessed between human connection. I think John alluded to it before, that there are so many non-verbal cues that we take in creating and forming relationships and forming trust. And I talk about high-performing teams with almost every client that we work with, and it's clear that high-performance teams have to have trust. And actually, most of those are formed by people coming together. I have another conversation I have with almost every client, which is around, have you won any new business during COVID with someone you'd never met before? Were you capable of creating a new relationship via video? The answer almost always is no. And I think it's really important for us to recognise when we are capable, and in places like Sydney, being able to actually start to redesign the office for the things that we can't do as well remotely, and recognise and drive design of offices and behaviour in offices around that, which for me are really culture, collaboration and information and kind of knowledge exchange so people learn. So that means they look a slight bit different, and that probably means they won't have as many desks, but I don't think it means it's the end of the office. And certainly for me, as a person who's been back in the office for about 8 weeks now, we've kind of reverted to the old way of work. I hate to tell anyone who's on the other side of it, but we live in a very different place. We are, still in single digit cases across this country, and everyone else on this call is in countries that have got, 5-digit numbers. So we have a very different paradigm, and I'm really honest when I say that. What we're seeing here is very different to the experiences of our global clients. And so we have to be really measured around that. That said, I think long term, we will actually start to make sure that the density of workplaces will de-densify, absolutely, and we'll start to drive, I guess, much more individualistic places as much as possible, but also some other really big, just basic shifts around hygiene in the workplace that I'm quite happy that things will become touchless and smarter. Hopefully we'll actually get to a smart building sometime soon.
Christian, I just want to play off 2 things that Amanda just said. So she talked about the social interaction and then also the workplace environment. Do some of the newer technologies that you focus on, can they potentially help with both of those things? Can you build social connections using virtual reality and similar tools? And is there also a chance to create that sort of newer environment, the work environment that's distributed?
Yeah, Gary, that's really a pretty good question. Yeah, indeed, that's the special thing about virtual reality or cross reality. There are now a lot of terms around this, and yeah, that's why mixed reality is a game changer. You understand a little bit about collaboration and communication. You have to understand that communication and collaboration was always the key of success of humankind. When you see a mammoth or something like this, I don't see one in the session. They're not here anymore, but we still survive. We have not the power to fight them with our bare hands. They have no chance. But what we did from beginning on, it was we communicated with each other and we collaborated with each other, and that made us strong. And that's the key of success, is working together. And communication technologies are a booster for this. And to understand why virtual reality is so important for communication in the long term and in the vision, I think there's a pretty interesting experiment that Stanford did already in the year 2000. They had a room scale virtual reality, even in 2000. Room scale means you can walk in virtual reality. And what they did is they put some basic objects inside. They put something inside like that's just a cube. And the subject had no idea what's about. So they checked what they did, and they walked to the object, they walked through the object, they touched the object. And then they started to put in human-looking avatars, moving or just moving their eyelids and things like that. and then they watched what happened. And what happened is they kept something that's called personal distance. And they had no idea what it is. So they could, in this experiment, they could prove that virtual reality for the brain feels like real. It really is able to trigger our deeper emotion, like personal distance. And we heard also from Amanda or from John, there are non-verbal clues, and John said there is a trust. And this technology helps to cross this barrier in the remote technologies. And so that's why I think it's a foundational technology that will change everything in the communication. You remember the iPhone, we had always the picture here from the Pope election. There were a few years, they just had the candles and the lighter. And a few years later, they did the pictures with the camera. And I think really virtual, mixed reality, cross realities, these are the technologies. That's the next big thing for communication and collaboration.
That's a big vision. And if there's anything we've seen with in the COVID era, it's that we've sort of accelerated a number of ways that we're more willing to adopt technologies than we might have thought otherwise. Certainly, I don't think many of us would have thought we'd have our entire days packed with Zoom calls before January of this year. So now, what we've said, I think for each of you, and because each of you are in different geographies, there's a variety of different sort of characteristics and different ways that different kinds of organizations, different industries, different locations are or are not adopting more distributed and remote work. I'm just going to open this up to all three of you, and please just any one of you just hop in. Do you see any particular trends that you believe are going to last when it comes to more distributed and more remote work in particular geographies or particular industries? Or what do you think we're actually likely to see in a year or two still is common from some of the practices that we've taken on today?
I was going to say one of the things that I think will stick is the reduction of commute. So when I think of distributed working, I think of localized hubs and the ability for someone to go to somewhere much closer to their home. So we could call that localized working, but it's certainly rather than the major head office or the world that you or John lived in San Francisco, where you might have commuted to the Valley, actually whether those big major corporate campuses will exist in that format or whether there will be more localized smaller hubs for some of these larger businesses. And I think really that idea of the massive conglomerate with 20,000 people in it is probably something that I think will be re-examined. And I think it'll be re-examined for many different reasons. Just people will choose to not commute as much. They will work from home more, so the scale of those things will change. But I think the reason why I think the distributed kind of locations will stick is that we've actually done 7 or 8 months working from home. Some people, and many people we survey, say they want to do that forever. I'm bamboozled by that generally as a human because I like other humans and I can't imagine spending 100 hours a week in my house. But hey, other people are really focused on that. But I think the best organizational outcome is to allow people to come together still. So I think it'll always be a balance, but I think the distributed piece, as in localized hubs, will stick for a period of time.
Oh, thanks. John or Christian, do you have any thoughts on what you think is likely to last from this era?
Yeah, so as I said before, in Germany, it will change a lot, and a lot will stick from this pandemic. As I said, we really struggled a little bit with digitalization. Now the situation was the booster for this. And I think afterwards we will after this we will go to a hybrid mode. So there will be a lot more remote office, home office that we will see in Germany. There even now, the government even considers now to bring to give a law that says you have the right to home office at least 1 day a week. And so they even think about this. So I'm sure that the work culture will pretty much be changed from this pandemic. It will not be completely remote because, like Amanda and everybody say, even virtual reality cannot fulfill this gap. So we will definitely meet again, but we will see a lot of more home office in the future in Germany.
Yep. Take a swing at it. I think, let me just start with actually an example in the healthcare industry. Before pandemic happened, we had to go see the doctor, set up an appointment, wait there for 30, 40 minutes, fill out our paperwork, talk to the doctor for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and then, we get our prescription and so forth. I think because of pandemic, now the telehealth, telemedicine has completely exploded. We've seen our customers just exploded, like they tripled in their business size in the first quarter of this year. So that's kind of the magnitude of the growth that we're seeing in the digital healthcare space. And I think what's happening, what people are finally realizing is that, no, we didn't have to go see the doctors every time in person. For something like a quick consultation, we could just simply set up a digital session. Now the regulations are kind of becoming a lot more fluid. You can just get a push notification, jump on a call, talk to the doctor in 5 minutes, hang up, and you're still back at your home. You didn't have to go travel and waste an hour just to talk to the doctor. So after the pandemic's over, will people go back to see the doctor in hospital? Yes, absolutely. People will go back. But will everyone go back? No. Like if you don't see the need to actually go physically see a doctor because you have a broken bone, it's very likely that you'll prefer a digital first experience. And I think we'll probably see something very similar in terms of how we collaborate, but how we also sell to customers. When we feel the actual need of benefit of meeting in person, we will do it. But if not, if we can still get things done over Zoom calls, then I think people will have the liberty to choose between what's the most efficient way of collaborating. So I think this pandemic has really helped all of the employees and employers really think about what do we think is more efficient to get stuff done, and what are some of the things that are being missing because of this fully digital communication. So I think after pandemic, yes, we will have a both mode of communication. And the other thing is, now employees are now starting to realize I didn't have to commute all the time. So people are relocating to different cities across the country. Within December alone too, we've seen a lot of employees move from San Francisco to Denver to other locations. And those employees, I don't think will be coming back to San Francisco after the pandemic's over. No, they will probably want to work remotely, or at least maybe occasionally travel to the Bay Area for meetings, but they'll probably want to work wherever they want to do. So I think that's kind of the world will be seeing after all this is over. Kind of quoting other people mentioned earlier, it's kind of the hybrid approach, but people will have better choices in terms of what's a better way to collaborate and communicate.
And do you think, John, you gave the example of telemedicine where doctors who might never have picked up a Zoom call ever suddenly are talking to their clients from remote. Do you see generally, you think people are adopting technologies, especially more remote and distributed worker kinds of technologies more readily? Or did we get this sort of rapid adoption wave because we had to, and then it's just no faster than it had been in the past?
Yes, I think it's just because we didn't have a choice. One kind of interesting psychological aspect is before, when we were talking to big clients, we were selling hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars in contract value. Of course they wanted to meet. Of course they want to wine and dine. But now, if we offer that, okay, we're going to go and meet you, they're going to freak out, like, don't come near me, right? So I think that because of this situation, everyone has been forced into working remotely and figure things out. And that kind of helped, I guess, our industry in a way, through whether it be API or SDK, but also the entire SaaS and B2B SaaS, the collaboration space and software industries are booming because now a lot of these companies have to adopt this technology to replicate or actually cover the areas that was possible before in the offline world. So how to collaborate where before we could just simply get into a room, hash it out. Now we have to use 3 different software to get something similar done. Of course, we'll be smart about choosing which software to use, but now we have to buy a lot more software to completely replicate our offline experience. So because of this situation, the collaboration tech space has exploded, and we've been kind of forced to learn this, and what we kind of call it as an accelerated learning experience.
As a person that's gone back to work, I think one of the things I talk about a lot is about the duality of experience. So John, you talked about before, like the world worked well when we're all on Zoom. The world works well when we're all in a room. When it works not very well, as a personal experience of late, is that when we've got 4 people in the room and 4 people on Zoom, and we're trying to do something that is a bit analog, or we're trying to do something that actually doesn't track me. So I'm trying to present to you, I can't watch your eyes, I can't see you, and all of that human interaction. And the things that make some of us great as presenters or making people fall in love with us just doesn't translate, because we actually can only see a room and we can't see your eye flicker or you frown at me and I know you don't like it. And so that, I think one of the things that I talk about a lot is our ability to evolve in that idea of duality. So actually, how do we get better technology that enables those two things to work together well? Because we're going to have hybrid in all things moving forward, including in that collaboration piece. And I think we actually need to think about how to train people to facilitate that, but also how to create the right software for that dual response. Because we've done really reasonably well across most sectors, working together, because we're all on the same medium and everyone was equal as a tile in the Brady Bunch, you know? And so once we kind of unequal that again, we're going to have to rework that collaboration piece again. And I think anyone who's in user experience will absolutely be focused on figuring out how to make that work and do it well.
No, I think that's a great insight, Amanda. I mean, it's in the same way, it's a constantly moving landscape of the work context. It's going to be a constantly moving landscape in terms of the technologies that we're using as well, and trying to continually sponsor all the kinds of innovation and collaboration that we're talking about and do that in a moving landscape is a pretty substantial challenge. So it's going to take a lot of adaptability and a lot of creativity. So Christian, you sort of sit at the the bleeding edge of some of the newer technologies. Who do you think is going to be most affected by these kinds of technological advances? Will the benefits of all these sort of new technologies be equally shared? Will people with different socioeconomic backgrounds have different challenges? How do you think we're going to, as humans, we're going to be able to adapt or not to these exponential technologies?
Yeah, who will adapt this? So I think everybody, that the price was dropping. The price is also a really important factor for the adoption of these technologies. Yeah, a few years ago, you needed a game computer, rather expensive, with a stationary mixed reality, virtual reality glasses. But recently, Oculus, Facebook brought with Oculus affordable mobile virtual reality devices. And I think they're even cheaper than an iPhone, or it's affordable for everybody who can afford a mobile phone. And I think that's important, that this technology is in this price range that will help to adopt it. And I think the question is rather something else. Who will in the future will be able to travel, because that will get more expensive also from the pandemic. So I had an interesting talk with a friend at Microsoft, and his vision was, in the future, the normal people, they just will travel in virtual reality, and the people who still can afford it, they do the real holiday. And really in Saarbrücken, I saw someone, really a homeless, lying there with a virtual reality device lying on the street. And then I had to remember also the talk with my friend from Microsoft. And I think that could be really the case, that rather the question is who can afford to do the real travel. And I think virtual reality have their bright future. And it's also, from this perspective, we have also another mega trend, and that's environmental care. And also virtual reality can also help this gap, because it can avoid certain travels.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things we're seeing, I just wrote a piece called Digital Dimes, where basically sort of the way that we thought about a lot of place-based activities, we're going to have to shift in our minds. And a lot of things that we used to take for granted that we could do in person are going to become the premium experience. So travel, certainly, education, is another one where potentially the place-based part is going to be the one that's going to be the most expensive, and the digital will be the most affordable. So just briefly, we've only got a little bit of time left, but I just wanted to ask each of you, if you could do one thing to try to help organizations that are more distributed to maintain their culture, what would you suggest to managers or leaders that they should do to try to keep the organization knit together in these more distributed times?
My answer would be simply get leaders to lead and actually set really clear boundaries around work. And I think that means not still being flexible, but actually setting some boundaries around what you would like to see from your employees. And I think that makes it much easier to be able to respond and to perform if you have some boundaries. And I think as a group of people that have come back to work, I think it's a lot clearer if a leader leads aligned to the values of the organization.
I think the one keyword here is leadership, but if I kind of break it down into kind of 3 subcomponents, one, particularly to this topic, one is setting the core values of the organization and really reinforcing that so that people can self-align and self-organize around the core values, what is the right behavior and kind of the traits that you're expecting out of the organization. And 2, this really puts a lot of burden on the people managers, but really setting clear expectations and holding people accountable to those goals. And to do that, you have to really give the trust first, because you can't see people every day. So by setting the clear goals and holding people accountable, but with the trust as a foundation. And lastly, would be again, going back to that documentation and transparency, really, just documenting as much as possible so that you are creating this shared knowledge base instead of this kind of pocket of information being shared by only a small group of people. How do you make it more transparent so that everyone in the organization can, again, have this stay in sync across different time zones, different geos. So if you, again, sum it up, I would call it leadership.
Christian, how about you?
Yeah, I think the management and leadership should be a good example of this and should make good use of the medium and show the people how it works and use that media to communicate with the people. I also think people should start to experiment more to collaborate with virtual reality. It's not the only one solution that you need. It's also like hybrid seems to be a very good buzzword. I think not everything works in virtual reality well. We do every day a daily in virtual reality. It's just 15 minutes. It's very comfortable to do it. And it brings a little bit feeling of social presence. And I think people and leadership should start to get the people used to it, because what I've always seen in the technology was the technology was very fast there, but the work culture change was pretty slow and always years behind the technology, the possibilities of the technologies. So I think it's time that you start to adopt early and to prepare the people for the next thing. And I really hope that that we don't fall back into our old behavior in Germany, because that was really rather office-based and not very flexible about home office and things like this. I really hope that management will now adopt this and get more open-minded. It's also a little bit with trust. I think many people had trust issues that people will not work as effective as before when they are not on site anymore. It's also complicated for the leadership because they lost somehow the control. They don't see what people do anymore. But I think they now realize, oh, everything is still working. I don't see any big difference from work performance and from my customers or anything. So I think they learned now it works. And I hope they will stick to this and give the people more freedom, like discussed before, freedom to choose where they work, when they work. I hope that will really kept.
No, I couldn't agree more. I call this our traditional approach to management by surveillance. I think that if there's anything that COVID has forced us to do is to instantiate trust. So I think we've actually learned people can actually do their work if you just give them the leeway to do that. I also want to pick up on one more thing just to add that John said when we began, which is intentionality. Is when we used to be able to just look across the room and catch somebody's eye and know that we need to talk to them after a meeting, or we used to do management by walking around, we could build that connection between people. But now that we're going to be working in so many different contexts with people, more distributed, we have to be far more intentional. You've got to do management by zooming around. You've got to check in with people and be much more aware. I always say for leaders, confidence, compassion, and courage. You've got to be much more intentional in this era and make sure that you're ensuring that everybody is part of the work team of the organization. So I want to thank all my guests. This has been an amazing learning experience for me. I hope that everybody who's been listening has gotten something out of this. It's been a tremendous opportunity for me to be able to meet you and to be able to help everybody to be able to get some of your wisdom. Just one last from each of you, maybe just 20 or 30 seconds. Do you have any one major takeaway or final thing you want to leave people with as we launch into this next phase of the era of distributed work? Christian, why don't I put you on the spot and ask you first?
Yeah, as I said before, start to play around with the new technology, because that's how the future, I'm pretty sure that's how the future will look like. And yeah, I suggest start early with it and take advantage, be one of the people who make most use of it, and yeah, be prepared.
John, how about you?
Yeah, I read somewhere that social distancing does not mean emotional distancing. And to do that in this pandemic world, you need to build connections in the digital world too. And Sandbird can help you build those connections through chat, voice, and video APIs. So thank you for having me.
Oh, great. Amanda, why don't you back clean up for us?
I think mine's simple: be brave and be human. And I think really remember what we're good at when we're together, and recognize what we've learned and how we can evolve and change. So I think take advantage of this as a time of pivotal change, but don't remember that the thing that makes us human is our ability to come together.
No, that's a wonderful note to leave on. So for everybody who's listening and watching, thank you for joining us, and be safe and be well.